They said he bought women the way other men bought horses. Quickly, coldly, without hesitation. They said he never kept them long. And they said, in whispers so low you had to press your ear to the speaker's lips, that some of the women he purchased were never seen again. Not dead. No one claimed that. Just gone. Swallowed by the Black Hollow Pack's territory, the way the ancient forest swallowed sound. Completely. Without echo. My name is Senna. And as the iron cage rattled beneath me, as the torchlight of the crossroads market flickered across the faces of buyers, traders, and wolves who watched me the way predators watch prey, I told myself one thing. Survive. Not escape. Not fight. Not hope. Just survive. Because hope was something I had buried 3 years ago, beside my mother's unmarked grave, in the ruins of a village that no longer existed on any map. The auctioneer's voice rose above the crowd. Next offering. Female, unclaimed, of unknown pack origin. Young. Healthy. Suitable for domestic labor. Or breeding arrangements. A murmur moved through the crowd. I kept my eyes forward. I had learned long ago that meeting the gaze of men at these markets was the fastest way to draw the wrong kind of attention. But then something happened that had never happened before in 3 years of being moved from cage to cage, market to market, pack to pack. The crowd went quiet. Not murmuring quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that precedes something enormous. Something that makes even cruel men step backward. And then I heard footsteps. One set. Measured. Heavy with authority. I still didn't look up. But I felt him. The way you feel a storm before you see the clouds. A pressure in the air. A heat that had nothing to do with the torches. A presence so ancient and so overwhelming that my wolf, the wolf I had been told was broken, was weak, was worthless, stirred in my chest for the first time in 3 years. She didn't growl. She didn't cower. She went completely, utterly still. Like she recognized something. Like she was afraid. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Alpha Cadman of the Black Hollow Pack has entered bidding. Nobody else bid. Not a single voice. I heard the clink of a heavy coin purse hitting the auctioneer's table. Far more than I was worth. Far more than anyone at this market had ever paid for a lone, unclaimed female with no pack name and no documented bloodline. Sold. I finally looked up. And for 1/2 second, one terrifying, inexplicable half second, I locked eyes with him. He was exactly what the rumors described. Dark. Powerful. A jaw carved from mountain stone. Eyes the color of a sky right before lightning strikes. Not quite gray, not quite silver, crackling with something electric. He should have looked at me the way a man looks at a purchase. But he didn't. He looked at me the way a man looks at a threat. And then, so fast I almost convinced myself I imagined it, something crossed his face. Not desire. Not contempt. Fear. The alpha of the Black Hollow Pack, the most feared wolf in 7 territories, looked at me. And he was afraid. That was 3 days ago. And I still don't understand why. The Black Hollow territory was nothing like what I expected. I had expected darkness. Rot. Something that matched the reputation of its alpha. Instead, the forest was magnificent. Ancient trees with trunks wider than 3 men standing arm to arm. Roots that rose from the earth like the fingers of buried giants. Canopies so dense that even at midday, sunlight arrived as scattered fragments. Golden shards falling through the green dark like broken pieces of something sacred. It was the most beautiful place I had ever been, which made it more terrifying, not less. Beautiful things that hold you captive are more dangerous than ugly ones. Because part of you doesn't want to leave. The escort wolves, 6 of them, all in human form, all wearing the Black Hollow's sigil burned into the leather of their armor, hadn't spoken to me once during the 3-day journey. They had given me food, water, a cloak when the temperature dropped. Not kindness. Efficiency. They were maintaining their alpha's property. The Black Hollow stronghold appeared at dusk. Not a castle in the way of human kings, but something older. Stone walls grown over with centuries of ivy. Towers that had been built, crumbled partially, and been rebuilt. The new stone fitted into the old without apology. A fortress that had survived so much it had stopped trying to look pristine. It looked, I thought, like something that refused to die. I was brought through a side entrance. Not the main gate. The lead escort, a broad-shouldered female with close-cropped silver hair and an expression that revealed nothing, gestured me through a narrow corridor lit by iron torch brackets. "You'll be given quarters," she said. "Not a cell." I looked at her. What's the difference? Something moved in her eyes. Not quite amusement. Cells have guards outside. Your room will have none. But I'm not to leave. She paused. Just briefly. You are not to enter the Alpha's wing. Or the training grounds. Or the war room. She began walking again. Everything else is open to you. I absorbed this. Why? Because the Alpha commanded it. But why did he command it? She stopped outside a heavy wooden door bound with iron and pushed it open without answering me. The room inside was simple but not cruel. A sleeping pallet with real furs. A wash basin. A narrow window that looked out over the inner courtyard. A small table. A candle already lit. It was the finest room I had occupied in 3 years. I stood in the doorway and said quietly, I was sold as a breeder. Is that still the intention? The silver-haired female looked at me for a long moment. I don't know what the Alpha's intentions are, she said. And that is the truth. She turned to leave. Your name, I said. What is it? Another pause. Slightly longer. Mira. I am the Alpha's beta. Mira. I held her gaze. He hasn't told you why he bought me, has he? Myra's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Sleep, she said. You'll be summoned in the morning. She pulled the door shut. I listened to her footsteps retreat down the corridor. And then I stood in the center of the room, this strange, ungated, unguarded room. And I tried to understand what kind of cage had no bars. The worst kind, I decided. The kind where you don't know the walls are there until you walk into them. I sat on the edge of the sleeping pallet and breathed. And my wolf stirred again, low in my chest. Restless. She hadn't stirred in 3 years. Not since the night my village burned. What do you know? I asked her silently. What are you feeling? But she didn't have words. She never did. She only had one answer, repeated over and over like a pulse. Him. I was not summoned in the morning. Or the afternoon. By the time the sun had moved across the narrow rectangle of my window and begun its descent, I had eaten twice. A tray appearing outside my door both times, left by unseen hands. And I had explored every inch of my room approximately 14 times. I was going to lose my mind. I was not a patient person by nature. 3 years of captivity had taught me the appearance of patience. The stillness. The waiting. But inside I was always moving. On the third tray, alongside the food, there was something else. A single pressed flower. Dark purple. Dried carefully enough that it still held its shape. A wolfsbane bloom. I stared at it for a long time. Wolfsbane was poison to werewolves. Even in dried, pressed form, prolonged contact could weaken a wolf's connection to their animal side. Was it a warning? A test? I picked it up carefully and set it at the far edge of the table, away from the food. Then I sat with the implication of it. Someone in this stronghold knew what wolfsbane meant to me specifically. Because to a wolf with a strong connection, a healthy, powerful wolf, a single dried bloom was inconsequential. Background noise. But to a wolf like me, whose connection was already described by every pack that had ever assessed me as fractured or faint, it was a message. We know your weakness. Or, we're trying to find out if you have one. A knock at the door. Sharp. 3 precise strikes. Come in, I said, though I had no authority to grant or refuse entry. The door opened. It was not Mira. It was him. Alpha Cadman of the Black Hollow Pack stood in the doorway of my small room and absolutely swallowed all the available space. He was taller than I remembered from the market. Or perhaps that was the effect of the torchlight here. It caught differently in an enclosed space, throwing deep shadows behind him and gilding the edges of his frame. He wore no ceremonial armor now. Dark linen, unlaced at the throat, heavy leather belt, bracers on both wrists, engraved with markings I didn't recognize. The kind of clothing that said, I am not trying to impress you, and I don't need to. His eyes found me instantly. That same color, charged silver gray. A sky at the exact moment lightning decided where to strike. And there it was again. That thing in his expression that shouldn't have been there. Wariness. Calculation. The careful distance a man keeps from something he doesn't fully understand. He didn't step into the room. He stood at the threshold, one hand resting on the doorframe. And he looked at me the way I had seen experienced hunters look at traps they weren't certain they had set correctly. You didn't need all of it, he said. His voice was low. Not gentle low. The register that vibrates in your sternum rather than reaching your ears first. I glanced at the tray. He was right. I'd left the bread. I wasn't hungry for all of it. You haven't eaten properly in at least 4 days. You were hungry for all of it. I looked back at him. Then why ask? A pause. Brief. Like he was recalibrating. I didn't ask. I observed. Yes. You seem to do a great deal of observing from doorways. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. I braced for anger, and it didn't come. Something more complicated. Did anyone speak to you today? No. Did anyone disturb you? No. Were you harmed? No. I tilted my head slightly. Were you expecting me to be? Another recalibration. I watched him do it. The almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, the deliberate breath. The wolfsbane, he said. On your table. I said nothing. I didn't send it. He said it quietly, with an emphasis that told me he wanted me to understand the difference between himself and whoever had. Then who did? That's what I'm going to find out. He looked at me for another 3 seconds. Steady, unblinking. And then he stepped back from the doorway. You'll join the communal evening meal tomorrow, he said. Mira will escort you. And tonight? The question surprised him. I could see it. Tonight, he repeated. You came here yourself, I said. Not Mira. Not a guard. You came to check on me. I'd like to know why. The longest pause yet. His jaw shifted. Something working behind those silver-gray eyes that I couldn't read. Because it was necessary, he said. And he was gone before I could ask what that meant. I sat in the echo of his presence, which lingered in the room like heat from a fire after the flames have been put out, and I turned his words over carefully. Necessary. Not courteous. Not protocol. Not my duty as your owner. Necessary. As if not checking on me would have had consequences, if something might happen if he stayed away. I looked at the wolfsbane bloom on the far edge of the table. Then I looked at the doorway where he'd stood. I was beginning to think the most dangerous thing in the Black Hollow stronghold was not the alpha. It was whatever he was trying so hard not to tell me. Mira came for me at sundown. She had exchanged her escort armor for a fitted leather vest and charcoal gray woven trousers. Her silver hair was pulled back from a face that was handsome in the way old battle axes are handsome. Efficient, unornamented, made entirely for purpose. She looked me over when I stepped into the corridor. I had done my best with what I had. Washed, rebraided my dark hair, straightened the second-hand tunic and cloak I'd been wearing since the Crossroads market. You'll need different clothing, Mira said. I wasn't offered any. I'll remedy that tomorrow. She turned and began walking. Tonight, stay close to me. Don't challenge anyone at the table. Don't speak unless spoken to, and if someone challenges your right to be there, defer to you. She glanced back, slightly surprised. Yes, I've been in packed communal spaces before, I said. I know the protocol. Most of the packs that would have sold you at that market aren't known for their adherence to protocol. Fair point. The Great Hall was enormous, or rather, it felt enormous because of what filled it. Long stone tables. Iron chandeliers holding dozens of candles. The smell of wood smoke and roasted meat and something resinous, like pine sap, that I realized after a moment was the collective scent of many wolves in an enclosed space. Pack scent. Belonging. Territory. All of which I did not have. Every head turned when Mira walked me in. That was expected. What was less expected, what coiled something nervous and cold in my stomach, was the nature of the attention. Not contemptuous. Not predatory. Wary. These wolves, hard-eyed and scarred and powerful, looked at me the way their alpha had looked at me. Carefully, Mira steered me to a seat at the far end of one of the long tables, removed from the center. Not a position of dishonor, just a position of distance. The conversations around me resumed, quieter than before. I ate. I watched. The alpha was not present. I noticed that absence more than I should have. The wolf to my left was young, barely more than an adolescent, lanky and still growing into his shoulders, with wide amber eyes that kept cutting sideways to me every few minutes. After the fourth sideways glance, I said quietly, "You can ask." He startled. "Ask what?" "Whatever question is making you stare." His ears went pink. "I wasn't." He stopped. Reconsidered. "Are you really from the Veilborn line?" I went very still. Not physically. I had learned physical stillness long ago. But inside, everything locked. "What?" I said. Carefully. Evenly. "The Veilborn bloodline. From before the Sundering." He was whispering now, leaning slightly closer. "Some people are saying that's why the Alpha." "Enough." Myra's voice. low, precise, and cutting. The boy went rigid and turned back to his food. I did not look at Mira. I kept eating, kept my breathing regular. Veilborn. I had never heard that word in connection with myself. I had never heard it at all, not clearly, not as something real, but something in the deepest part of me. Beneath the thinking mind, beneath the 3 years of learned blankness, recognized it. Like a word heard in childhood that you can't quite place. I forced myself to eat 3 more bites before I looked up. At the head of the great hall, not at a table, but on a raised platform of old stone, there was a carved chair. Old enough that the carvings had blurred at the edges with age. Big enough for a large man. Empty. But on the wall directly above it, carved in deep relief into the stone itself, was a symbol I had seen before. I had seen it on the bracers Cadman had worn. A crescent moon inside a circle. And inside the moon, a second, smaller marking. One that wasn't quite a rune and wasn't quite a wolf. Something between the two. I stared at it, and my wolf, who had been quietly vibrating in my chest since we entered this hall, suddenly surged upward. Not in fear, not in warning, in recognition. I pressed my hand flat against the table to steady myself and dropped my eyes before anyone could see what was happening on my face. What is that symbol? I demanded silently. Why do you know it? My wolf didn't answer in words. She only answered in the same way she always did. Like a heartbeat. Like a tide. Him. 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 What just happened in your chest when Senna's wolf recognized that symbol? Because I promise you, that marking means everything. And Cadman knows it. I didn't sleep. I lay on the pallet with my eyes open and stared at the dark ceiling and turned the word over and over until it wore smooth. Veilborn. I knew nothing about it. Not concretely. Not in the way you know your own name or the smell of your mother's hair. But something in my body knew. That was the part that frightened me most. Not that a stranger had said the word. That my own blood had answered it. By the time pale light began creeping through my narrow window, I had made a decision. I was going to find the Alpha. Not wait to be summoned. Not sit quietly in my ungated, unguarded room and let the mystery press down on me until I couldn't breathe. I was going to find him, and I was going to ask him directly. Because the worst thing he could do was refuse to answer. And I had survived far worse than silence. I found him before I expected to. He was in the inner courtyard. Alone. The sun had barely risen. A thin, cold light that turned everything silver and gray. And he stood in the center of the stone yard without a cloak, without armor, wearing only the dark linen and leather I'd seen the night before. He was fighting. Not with a partner. Not with a training dummy. He was moving through forms, combat sequences, slow and precise, the way you practice something until it lives in muscle instead of mind. His movements were economical. No wasted motion. The kind of fighting knowledge that takes decades to embed into the body. He had a blade in each hand. Short swords, heavy and old, with no ornamentation. Working weapons. He moved like water finding its level. Like something inevitable. And he knew I was there before I reached the courtyard entrance. He didn't stop moving. You were told not to enter the training grounds, he said. Without turning. Without breaking the rhythm of the forms. You were also told not to enter my room, I said. And yet, a pause in the sequence. Brief. Then it resumed. That was different. Was it? He completed the sequence. Came to stillness. Turned. He looked at me across the empty courtyard, and in the early morning light, cold and unforgiving, I could see things the torchlight had hidden. A scar along his jaw, old and silvered. Another crossing his left forearm, wider, the kind left by claws rather than blades. The particular tension he carried in his shoulders, not aggression. Something closer to exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who never truly rests. You want answers, he said. Someone told me I might be Veilborn. Last night at the meal. Something moved across his face. Quick and dark. Who? A young wolf. He was silenced before he could say more. I held his gaze. What is Veilborn? Cadman was quiet for a long moment. He crossed the courtyard slowly. Not toward me. To the low wall at the far edge, where he'd left a cloth for the blades. He began cleaning them with steady, unhurried strokes. You know the history of the Sundering? He asked. Vaguely. The Great Division. When the ancient packs split and the bloodlines separated. Before the Sundering, he said, there was one pack. One territory. One alpha line. He didn't look up from the blade. They were called the Veil Pack. the oldest wolves. The first ones. They held a connection to the moon that no bloodline since has replicated. I waited. The Veil Pack's females, he continued, were not breeders in the way the term is used now. They were something else. Something older. He paused. Set the blade down. When a Veil female bonded with a male wolf, the bond wasn't just a mating. Mark. It was a transfer. He finally looked at me. The female's power became the male's. Completely. Permanently. Whatever she carried in her blood, whatever connection to the moon she held, passed into her mate and amplified everything he already was. I processed this slowly. And if she bonded unwillingly? The transfer still occurred. His voice was flat, which is why Veil females were hunted, sold, stolen, and fought over for 3 centuries after the Sundering. Every alpha who could get his hands on one did. And then they disappeared, I said quietly. And then they disappeared. He held my gaze. The last confirmed Veil female died 80 years ago, unmated and hiding. The bloodline was believed extinct. The courtyard was very quiet. A bird called somewhere in the trees beyond the walls. Once. Then silence. You think I'm one of them, I said. I don't think, he said. I know. The certainty in it hit me like cold water. How? Because when you were brought to the Crossroads Market, every unmated alpha within 4 territories felt it. He picked up the second blade, resumed cleaning it. A signal, old and involuntary, like a bell ringing that only certain ears can hear. And you came. I came fastest. Why? He set the blade down, turned to face me fully. And for the first time, I saw something in his expression that wasn't controlled. Something raw and deeply uncomfortable. Because if I hadn't, he said carefully, someone else would have. And they would have bonded you immediately. Taken everything you carry. A muscle worked in his jaw. Unmated, you're extraordinary. Mated by force, you become a weapon. The most powerful weapon in the known territories. I let that settle. So you bought me, I said slowly, to keep other alphas from using me. Yes. And you haven't. I stopped. Started again. You've kept your distance. Deliberately. Yes. Because if you bond with me. If I bond with you, he said, and something in his voice dropped to a register I felt in my spine. I take everything you are. Without your consent. Without your choice. He looked at me steadily. I won't do that. The silence that followed was enormous. I stared at him. This man who had bought me at a market. This alpha who kept weapons beside his sleeping place and had scars layered over older scars and who the entire territory feared. Who had paid an extraordinary sum to keep me from being used. And who refused to use me himself. You could have just told me this, I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. I needed to assess you first. Assess me for what? He picked up both blades. Turned toward the stronghold entrance. Whether you already know what you are, he said. Whether someone sent you. I blinked. Sent me. He stopped. Looked back over his shoulder. There are alphas who would very much like to get a Veil female into my territory. Who would use her as a way to get close enough to destroy everything I've built here. His eyes were level. The wolfsbane on your table was left by someone checking whether you reacted to it. Testing your bloodline. Someone in your pack. Someone in my pack. He held my gaze for one more long moment. I don't believe you were sent, he said. But I needed to be certain. And now you are. Now I'm closer to it. He walked inside. I stood in the empty courtyard in the thin morning light and pressed both hands flat against my thighs to stop them from shaking. Not from fear. From something I didn't have a clean name for yet. A Veil female. Ancient bloodline. Hunted for centuries. The reason every pack that had ever held me had described my wolf as broken and faint. Was it because she was suppressed? Hiding. Protecting me from being discovered. I looked down at my hands. What are you? I asked myself. What are we? My wolf stirred. And this time, for the first time in 3 years, I felt the edges of something immense and sleeping inside her. Like standing at the base of a mountain in the dark. You can't see it, but you feel the size of it. And you understand, suddenly, why people are afraid that I spent the morning with Mira. Not by choice. She appeared at my door before I'd finished processing the morning's conversation and informed me that the alpha had requested I be oriented to the stronghold. Oriented, I repeated. You need to know the territory. She handed me a folded bundle. And you need proper clothing. I unfolded it. Dark wool. Well made. A tunic long enough to layer, leather-laced bracers. a heavier cloak in deep charcoal, and knee-high boots that looked broken in by someone else, but were still far better than what I had. I looked at Mira. He chose these. He specified the quality. I chose the items. A pause so brief it was almost not a pause. He wanted you warm and unremarkable. Unremarkable. So other alphas passing through wouldn't look twice. Protection, again, disguised as practicality. I dressed. The wool was warmer than anything I'd worn in years. I didn't examine how much that undid me. The Black Hollow territory was more complex than it appeared from outside. Mira walked me through it methodically. The Great Hall and its attached kitchens. The healing ward, run by an elderly female named Osra who looked at me with calm, evaluating eyes and said nothing. The training yards, 3 of them, each for different purposes. The armory. The storerooms. The stronghold housed approximately 200 wolves. That was twice what I'd assumed from the outside. Are you always at full strength? I asked. No, Mira said. We've called in the outer patrols. Why? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Because of me. Because having a Veil female in the territory was the kind of thing that attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention. And Cadman had responded by pulling his people inward. How many of them know what I am? I asked. 3, Mira said. Myself, the Alpha, and the healer, and whoever left the Wolfsbane. Myra's jaw tightened. That small, almost invisible tension. Yes, she said. And them. You don't know who it was. Not yet. It frightens you. She stopped walking, turned to look at me fully. For the first time, I saw something in Myra's face that wasn't control deficiency. Every wolf in this pack would die for Cadman, she said quietly. Every one. I'd stake my life on it. She held my gaze. Which means whoever left that Wolfsbane isn't doing it for themselves. Someone outside these walls told them to, paid them to, or threatened them into it. The implications settled like stones dropped in still water. Ripple after ripple after ripple. There are alphas already moving, I said. Aren't there? The moment you appeared at that market, word traveled faster than any messenger. Mira resumed walking. We have perhaps 3 weeks before the first serious challenge arrives at our border. 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, what changes? Nothing changes, she said. Unless the Alpha bonds with you. He said he won't. I know what he said. You disagree with him. Mira was quiet for 4 full steps. I think, she said carefully, that Cadman has many reasons, good reasons, for the position he's taken. I also think. She stopped at a junction in the corridor. Turned to me one more time. I think he has never encountered a situation where his principles and his pack's survival were in direct opposition. And you think this is that situation? I think this might become that situation. She walked on. I followed. And I tried very hard not to think about what it meant. That the only thing standing between me and being used as a weapon by someone else was an Alpha's refusal to use me himself. A refusal that his own beta was quietly questioning. We were crossing the eastern corridor, a long stone passage that connected the main stronghold to the outer watch posts. When I first smelled it. Wrong. That was the only word my instinct produced. Wrong. A scent beneath the normal overlay of pack smell. Something chemical and bitter. Wolfsbane again. But fresh this time. Not a pressed flower. A solution. I stopped walking. Mira stopped 2 steps later. What? Do you smell that? She went still. Lifted her chin slightly, nostrils flaring. Her face changed. The water barrels, she said, and she was already moving. Not walking, running. I ran after her. The eastern corridor led to a secondary kitchen used to supply the watch posts. 3 large wooden barrels stood against the wall, filled with the day's water supply for the wolves on outer patrol. Mira reached them first, dipped a finger, pressed it to the tip of her tongue. Then she turned with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Fury, white and cold and absolute. Someone dosed the patrol water, she said. Dilute Wolfsbane solution. Not enough to incapacitate. Enough to dull the wolves on outer watch for several hours. I felt the coldness move through me. Long enough for someone to cross the border, I said. Long enough for someone to cross the border. She was already reaching for the iron bell mounted on the corridor wall. The emergency signal. She rang it. 3 sharp strikes. A pause. 3 more. The stronghold responded immediately. I heard shouts, running feet, the particular organized sound of a pack moving into defensive formation. Mira turned to me. You, she said. Need to go to the Alpha's wing. You said I wasn't allowed. That rule just changed. You go there, you lock the door, and you do not open it for anyone except me or Cadman. Her eyes were fierce. Do you understand? I did. The most valuable thing in the Black Hollow, the thing other Alphas were risking everything to get their hands on, was me. And someone had just opened the gates. Go, Mira said. I went. I ran through corridors that were beginning to fill with armed wolves moving in organized streams, and I thought, whoever is inside your pack has been planning this. This isn't impulse. This is preparation, which meant the wolfsbane flower in my room. That had been the beginning, the test, and this was the escalation. And whatever came next, whatever crossed the border with the guards dulled and distracted, was going to be worse. I reached the Alpha's wing door. Heavy oak, iron-banded. A sigil burned into the wood. I pressed my palm flat against it. And on the other side, without a word, without a sound, the door opened. Cadman stood on the other side. He had heard the bell. He was already armed, a long blade at his hip, bracers locked. His eyes took me in immediately, checking, assessing. You're unhurt, he said. Relief swift and almost hidden. Someone dosed the patrol water, I said. Mira told me to come here. She was right. He stepped back, let me in, closed and barred the door. His quarters were larger than mine, but no more decorated. A sleeping area. A heavy desk covered in maps. Weapons on the wall. Not for show, all of them used. A fire burning low in the hearth. He moved to the desk. Began studying the maps. I moved to where I could see them too. You know these territories? He asked without looking up. Some of them. I pointed. That border marker is wrong. That ridge runs further east than that. He looked up sharply. How do you know that? I traveled through there. 3 years ago. I met his gaze. Before I was taken. A pause. Which pack were you born into? I don't know, I said. I was told my pack was destroyed before I was old enough to remember. I was raised by my mother alone in a border village. She never told me our bloodline. Because she knew, he said quietly. The weight of it. My mother, alone in a border village, raising a daughter she never named as Vale. Teaching her to be invisible. Teaching her to keep her wolf quiet and small and unremarkable. Protecting me. For as long as she could. She died 3 years ago, I said. The village burned. I was taken in the chaos. Cadman looked at me. Not with pity. With something more uncomfortable than pity. Understanding. The particular kind that comes from recognizing a parallel. My mother died protecting me too, he said. And then, as if he hadn't said something devastating, he turned back to the maps. The intruder will come from the northeast, he said. Here. He pointed. The ridge gives cover, and the tree line extends close enough to the wall that a skilled wolf could cross unseen. He glanced at me. Which means whoever inside my pack arranged this knows the terrain. Someone who patrols, I said. Or someone who trained people who do. He was already moving toward the door. Stay here, he said. And if they come for me while you're gone? He stopped, turned back, and looked at me with those storm-gray eyes and said something I didn't expect. Don't hide, he said. If something comes through that door, don't hide. Then what do I do? Something crossed his face. Too quick to name. Trust what's inside you, he said. It's bigger than you know. He was gone before I could answer. And I stood alone in the firelit room, surrounded by his maps and his weapons and the low, warm smell of wood smoke in him. And I pressed my hand flat over my sternum, where my wolf lived, where something ancient and sleeping was beginning, very slowly, to wake. Bigger than you know. What did he see in me that I couldn't see in myself? And why, did part of me think that finding out might be the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to either of us? I did not stay in Cadman's quarters. I know he told me to. I know Mira would have been furious. I know every practical argument supported remaining behind that barred door and waiting for the danger to resolve itself around me. But something pulled me out. Not recklessness. Not bravery. My wolf. She had moved from that low, vibrating unease into something urgent and directional, like a compass needle swinging to north. Like she knew exactly where I needed to be. She pulled me toward the eastern courtyard. I took a blade from the wall of Cadman's quarters, a short-handled hunting knife, heavy and real, and I went. The stronghold was in organized chaos. Wolves in leather armor moving in practiced formations. Shouts in the disciplined shorthand of people who've trained together. Torches lit along every wall, the outer perimeter blazing against the dark. Nobody stopped me. In the movement and the urgency, I was just another body moving with purpose. I reached the eastern courtyard, and I found what had crossed the border. Not a pack, not an army, one wolf. He was already inside the walls, which meant the patrol gap had been used exactly as Cadman predicted. He stood in the center of the courtyard in human form, very still, wearing the dark riding leathers of a rival pack's colors. He was young, perhaps 20, high-ranking by his bearing, and he was looking directly at me the moment I stepped into the courtyard, as if he'd known exactly where I'd be. "There she is," he said softly. 2 black hollow wolves moved in from either side, cutting off his exit. He didn't seem concerned. "I'm not here to fight," he said, raising both hands in an open gesture. Still looking at me. "I'm here to deliver a message." He reached slowly into his vest and produced a small roll of sealed parchment. Held it toward me. "For you specifically." "Don't touch it," said a voice behind me. "Cadman." He moved past me into the courtyard, and the air changed the moment he did. The way the atmosphere changes when lightning is actually about to strike, not just threaten. The young messenger's composure flickered briefly. "Alpha Cadman." A respectful inclination of the head. "My Alpha sends greetings." "Your Alpha," Cadman said, "sent a spy into my territory after compromising my patrol water. Tell me why I shouldn't remove his greeting along with your head." A pause. The messenger swallowed. "Because the message is important," he said. "And because my Alpha believes the female deserves to hear it. She is not yours to address." Cadman's voice was very quiet, very still, the kind of stillness that precedes violence. "She is not yours either," the messenger said carefully. "That is precisely the point." The silence stretched. I stepped forward. "Let me see it," I said. "Senna." "Let me see it," I said again. Not loudly, not with aggression, but with something in my voice that made Cadman go very still. I took the parchment from the messenger's hand, broke the seal, unrolled it. The handwriting was precise and deliberate. Someone who knew the importance of every word. To the veiled female held by the Black Hollow Pack. "You do not know your name. You do not know your bloodline. You do not know what you carry. He knows. He has always known. Ask him why he hasn't told you all of it. Ask him what the marking on his bracers means. Ask him why a veil-born female's power, freely given, differs from a power that is taken. Then ask yourself, why would a ruthless alpha refuse to take what he could simply take? You are not his prisoner. You are his only hope. Come to us willingly, and we will give you what he never will. Your true name. Your full history. The complete truth of what you are. The choice, as it has always been, is yours." I read it twice. Then I rolled it carefully and looked at the messenger. "Tell your Alpha," I said quietly, "that I'll consider it." The messenger blinked. He'd expected something else. Fear, perhaps, or immediate refusal. "Senna," Cadman's voice. "I said I'll consider it," I said, which is not a yes. I looked at Cadman, and is not something you can prevent me from doing. Something moved across his face. Complicated. Raw. "Remove him," he said to his wolves. "Alive. To the border." The messenger was taken. Cadman and I stood in the emptying courtyard. He held out his hand for the parchment. I didn't give it to him. "You know who sent this?" I said. "Yes." "Tell me." A breath. "Alpha Wren of the Thornwood Pack. My oldest rival." He held my gaze. "He's been searching for a veil female for 20 years. And now he knows you have one." "Yes." "Because someone inside your pack told him." "Yes." I looked down at the parchment, then at his bracers. "What does the marking mean?" I asked. Cadman went very still. "I can read the letter," I said. He knew exactly which question to ask, which means he knew there was something about the marking you hadn't told me. "Senna, what does it mean?" A long, heavy pause. "It's the veil mate mark," he said finally. "The symbol mates carry after a true veil-born bond." His voice was very controlled. "My ancestor, 6 generations back, was bonded to a veil female. Willingly. The mark passed through the bloodline." He paused. "Which means I am partially veil descended." The silence was immense. "Partially veil descended," I repeated slowly. Which means I'm not a fully external wolf taking power from you," he said. He stopped. Started again. "A veil-descended male bonding with a veil female wouldn't be a transfer of power. It would be a joining," I said softly. "A joining," he confirmed. His voice was rough at the edges now. stripped of some of its control. Not dominance. Not theft. Something the old texts call a completion. Ask yourself, why would a ruthless alpha refuse to take what he could simply take? I looked at him. This man who'd bought me to protect me, who'd kept his distance to protect me, who'd shared meals and words and an almost confession about his mother, and who was standing in a torchlit courtyard after a border breach with something in his expression that wasn't strategy or calculation or ruthless alpha pragmatism. It was longing, old and deep and rigorously controlled. You could have told me, I said. I needed you to. I know. You needed to assess me. Something tightened in my throat. You needed to know I wasn't sent. Wasn't a weapon. Wasn't a trap. I held his gaze. And now you know. Yes, he said quietly. So why? I said. Are you still afraid of me? The question landed. And this time, he didn't look away from it. Because wanting something this much, he said, is the most dangerous thing I've ever experienced. And the courtyard, the torches, the whole enormous night went very quiet around that. That letter, that marking, that final confession in the torchlight. You felt it, didn't you? He didn't buy her to own her. He bought her because she's the only thing that could complete him. And he's terrified of wanting her, that I didn't sleep that night either. But this time it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was clarity. The kind that comes after a long confusion finally breaks open. The kind that feels less like peace and more like standing at the edge of something enormous and finally being able to see how far down it goes. I lay on the pallet in Cadman's quarters. He had insisted, after the courtyard breach, that my previous room was no longer secure enough, and I listened to him move on the other side of the heavy curtain that divided the space. He didn't sleep either. I could hear him at the desk, the soft sound of a quill, papers shifting, occasionally the quiet scrape of a blade being lifted and set down again. A man working through a problem the way other men pace. I stared at the ceiling. You are not his prisoner. You are his only hope. Wren's letter had been designed to destabilize, to plant doubt, to make me question Cadman's motives and turn toward a rival who would, despite the elegant phrasing about choice and truth, use me far more completely than Cadman ever had. I understood manipulation. I had lived inside it for 3 years. But even manipulation has to use true things as bait. And some of what that letter said was true. Cadman had withheld the full meaning of his bracers. The veil mate mark. The completion bond. The fact that he wasn't simply a dominant alpha absorbing power from a weaker source. He was a partial veil descendant, which made a willing bond between us something entirely different from what I'd been told to fear. Why had he withheld it? Because he was afraid of wanting it too much. He'd said so himself, in the courtyard, in the torchlight, with a rawness that I didn't think he showed people often. But was that all? I turned onto my side. Was there more he still hadn't said? In the early gray hours before dawn, I heard the quill stop. A long silence. Then Cadman's voice low through the curtain. I know you're not sleeping. I know you're not either, I said. A beat. Are you warm enough? The question was so unexpectedly ordinary that something in my chest moved sideways. Yes, I said. Thank you. Silence again. But a different quality of silence. Less like separation, and more like two people occupying the same quiet. Cadman. Yes. What aren't you telling me? The longest pause yet. I heard him set something down on the desk. Heard him stand. The shift of weight. The small sounds of a large man moving carefully in a space he's trying not to dominate. He appeared at the edge of the curtain. Didn't cross it. Held the edge of the heavy fabric in one hand, and looked at me in the pre-dawn gray. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Something deeper. The completion bond, he said. I told you what it is. I didn't tell you what it costs. I sat up slowly. Tell me now. He looked at the floor briefly. Then back at me. A veil completion bond is permanent, he said. Unbreakable. Both wolves are permanently changed. He paused. The female doesn't lose her power. It amplifies in both directions. She becomes more, not less. Another pause. But she is bound. To the male. To his territory. To his survival. His jaw tightened. If I die, you are weakened severely. Possibly fatally. The bond connects life forces. I held his gaze. And if I die? Something moved through his expression so fast I almost missed it. Then I follow, he said simply. The weight of it. The absolute, permanent, irrevocable weight of it. That's why you've been afraid, I said softly. Not just of wanting me. Of what wanting me means. I paused. You're the alpha of 200 wolves. If you bond with me and I die, your pack loses its alpha. Yes. Your personal survival is tied to mine. Yes. And you bought me anyway. His eyes met mine. Yes, he said. For the third time. Each one quieter than the last. I thought about that for a long moment. That's not ruthless, I said. That's the opposite of ruthless. He almost smiled. Just the edge of it, there and gone. Don't tell anyone, he said. I have a reputation to maintain. And for one breath, one fragile, genuine breath, the whole enormous situation became almost bearable. Then his expression shifted. There's something else, he said. The almost smile was gone. The traitor, I said. Yes. He moved to the desk, lifted a piece of parchment, brought it to the curtain's edge, and held it out. I took it. A list of names. 6 of them. With notations beside each, patrol rotations, access points, dates. Process of elimination, he said. After the water barrels. After your room. After the timing of the border breach. He pointed to the 4th name on the list. One person had access to all 3 points. One person knew the Eastern Patrol rotation well enough to time the gap precisely. I read the name, and felt something cold drop through me. OSRA, I said. The healer. The elderly female with calm, evaluating eyes who had looked at me in the healing ward and said nothing. Said nothing. Because she was already measuring me. Already sending word. She has family in the Thornwood territory, Cadman said. A son. Wren has been holding him for 8 months. The coldness in me shifted. From suspicion to something more complicated. She's not doing it because she wants to, I said. No. She's doing it because she has no choice. No. I looked at the list again. At her name. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to get her son back, he said. Simply. As if this were obvious. And then I'm going to give her a choice. Stay and be accountable to the pack, or leave with him. I stared at him. You're not going to punish her. She's a mother protecting her child. His voice was level. I'm not going to add my cruelty to Wren's. Something shifted in my chest. Significant and irreversible. This man. This supposedly ruthless, cold, feared alpha. Who bought an unknown female to protect her from worse men. Who refused to take a power that would strengthen his pack because it would cost her consent. Who, upon discovering his trusted healer was a traitor, immediately moved to understand why and respond with something that looked dangerously close to mercy. Cadman, I said. Yes. I'd like to go with you. A pause. When I go to Wren, I said. When you confront him about the son, about the border breach, I want to be there. That's not safe. I know. I held his gaze. But Wren's entire strategy relies on me being passive. Hidden. Something to be retrieved. I paused. What happens to his strategy if I show up willingly? Standing beside you. His eyes narrowed very slightly. Working through it. I watched him do it and thought. This is what he's like when he's genuinely engaged. Not performing strength. Actually thinking. It was more compelling than the strength. Not yet, he said finally. Not until I know more about his current position. He met my eyes. But I'm not dismissing it. Which was more than I expected. I lay back down. Cadman. Thank you. For telling me the rest of it. A pause. I should have told you sooner. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Another almost smile. I could hear the edge of it in the silence. Sleep, he said. We move on OSRA at first light. He withdrew from the curtain's edge. I closed my eyes. And my wolf, for the first time in 3 years, settled. Not gone. Not suppressed. Just still. The way a river goes still in a deep place, where the current runs calm and very strong beneath a surface that shows you nothing of the power below. Him, she said. Still. Always. But differently now. Not a warning. Not a question. A recognition that we found OSRA in the healing ward at dawn. She was already awake. She was always already awake, Mira told me quietly, had been for as long as anyone in the pack could remember. Tending the small herb bundles that hung from the ceiling, checking the salve pots, reorganizing things that probably didn't need reorganizing. The hands of a person who stays busy to keep the mind from going somewhere unbearable. She knew why we'd come the moment Cadman appeared in the doorway. I watched her face. The moment of it. The way a person's expression does something particular when a thing they've been dreading finally arrives. Not quite relief, not quite despair, but a surrender to the inevitable that is almost peaceful. She set down the herb bundle. She didn't try to explain, or deny, or flee. My son, she said. To Cadman. Directly. Is he alive? Cadman said. We believe so. The breath she released was enormous. Her hands briefly shook. Then she composed herself, turned to fully face him. I'll tell you everything I passed to Ren, she said. Every communication. Every piece of information. All of it. A pause. In exchange for his return. You don't need to bargain, Cadman said. I'm going after him regardless. OSRA blinked. Whatever she'd prepared herself for, punishment, consequences, the Alpha's judgment, it hadn't been that. The exchange of information is still required, Mira said from beside me. Practical as ever. We need to know what Ren knows. Of course. OSRA looked at me. For a long moment. He knows she's here. He knows she's unmated. She paused. He doesn't know about the completion bond. I didn't know about it myself until... She stopped. Until, Cadman said. Until 3 nights ago. When I followed the Alpha to the eastern courtyard and heard. She held his gaze steadily. I didn't pass that information. I want you to know that. A beat. I don't know if it matters to you. But I want you to know. Cadman looked at her for a long moment. It matters, he said quietly. OSRA nodded. What else does Ren know? Mira pressed. He knows she's afraid. He believes she's passive. Compliant. That 3 years of the trade broke her. OSRA paused. She was still looking at me. He's wrong. Yes, Cadman said. Very quietly. He is. I felt the weight of both of them looking at me, and I held still beneath it. He'll move within the fortnight, OSRA said. He has a force assembled. 40 wolves. His plan is a formal challenge. Alpha combat at the border. Winner takes the territory and everything in it. The room was very quiet. 40 wolves. His challenge is legal under pack law? I asked. Mira glanced at me. Technically, a formal territorial challenge with sufficient force is recognized under ancient compact. And if Cadman loses? He won't, Mira said. But if he does? A beat of silence. If he does, Cadman said calmly, then Ren takes the Black Hollow. And everything in it. He met my eyes. Including you. The word including landed with precision. Unless, I said slowly, I'm not here. You're not going to Ren, Cadman said immediately. That's not what I mean. I looked at Mira. If I'm not in the Black Hollow when Ren challenges, if I've left the territory voluntarily, then his justification for the challenge weakens. Slightly, Mira said carefully. Not completely. He wants the territory as much as he wants her. But without her as the prize, some of his 40 wolves might not fight with the same conviction. I pressed. Mercenary wolves follow incentive. Remove the incentive. This is not the plan, Cadman said. I'm not suggesting I leave, I said. I'm thinking aloud. I want to understand all the angles. He looked at me. You've been thinking tactically since you woke up, he said. Observation, not accusation. I've had nothing else to do for 3 years but observe and think, I said. It turns out being invisible in a room teaches you a great deal about how the visible people operate. Something shifted in his expression. Come with me, he said. He took me to the war room. It was exactly what it sounded like, a room built for war. Stone walls covered in mounted maps. A central table with a permanent relief model of the territory and its surrounds, built from packed clay and painted, marking every ridge and water source and border post in meticulous detail. Cadman stood at the table. He laid out what he knew, Ren's position, his likely approach, the angles of a formal territorial challenge. And then, and this was the thing I hadn't expected, he looked at me and said, What do you see? I leaned over the table. I looked at it carefully. The pack positions, the geography, the distances. He expects you to meet him at the northern border, I said. Here, because that's where formal challenges are traditionally met. I traced a line on the map. But if you move your main force here, the western ridge, and send a smaller group to meet him at the north as expected, you split his attention. He has 40 wolves. How many do you have at full capacity? 63 fit for combat. Then you have the numbers to split and still match him at both points. I looked up. He's expecting a traditional defense from a defensive position. What he won't expect is being flanked. Mira, who had followed us in, was looking at the map with an expression I couldn't quite read. Cadman looked at me steadily. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. I watched it done, I said. In 3 years in the trade, I was held briefly by 4 different packs. You observe a great deal when no one thinks you're worth watching. He was quiet for a moment. Your mind, he said, very carefully. Was that your mother or something older? The question reached into me and touched something that hadn't been touched in years. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe both. He held my gaze for a long moment. And then something happened that I hadn't expected and couldn't have prepared for. He reached across the table and laid his hand over mine, not grasping, not taking, just covering, warm and still and deliberate. I'm going to get OSRA's son back, he said quietly, and I'm going to end Ren's threat to this pack. And when it's done, he paused. The words careful, heavy. When it's over and you have had time to understand everything you are, I want you to choose. I looked at his hand over mine. Choose, I repeated. Whether to stay, he said, or go, or, his jaw moved slightly, or anything else. The firelight in the war room moved across his face, the scar along his jaw, the exhaustion he never quite put down, the storm-gray eyes that held something immense and carefully restrained. Cadman, I said. Yes, I already know. His hand went very still over mine. Know what? He said, barely above a sound. What I want to choose. The silence between us was alive, full, the most crowded silence I'd ever stood in. I turned my hand over beneath his, palm to palm. A small movement, enormous consequence. His breath changed. I heard it, and my wolf, that ancient sleeping, immense thing inside me, rose to the surface for the first time since the night my village burned. Not violently, like a tide coming in. Inevitable, unhurried, absolutely certain. Cadman's eyes went to silver bright. Not the storm color I'd seen before, but something beneath it. Something older. The veil descended part of him, recognizing what was rising in me. His fingers closed around mine. Not yet, he said. His voice was rough. Not until Ren is ended. Not until you're truly free. He held my gaze. I won't let the bond begin under duress. This doesn't feel like duress, I said. I know. Something raw moved through his expression. That almost makes it harder. I understood. He wanted it to be unambiguous, untainted. No threat on the horizon, no rival at the border. Nothing that could make my choice look like survival strategy rather than genuine desire. He was protecting my choice again, even from himself. Then end it quickly, I said. Something moved in his expression that I couldn't name. I intend to, he said. He didn't let go of my hand. Not yet. Not for a long time after. And in that war room, surrounded by maps of a territory that held its breath, I felt the first thread of something ancient and warm and impossibly powerful begin to move between us. Not the bond. Not yet. But the intention of it. The wanting made visible. And that, I was beginning to understand, was more dangerous than anything Ren could bring to any border point 3 days past. 3 days of preparation. Of strategy. Of Cadman moving through his pack like a current. Quiet, directional, impossible to resist. He was extraordinary to watch. I don't mean his physical power, though that was undeniable. I mean the way he led. The conversations I observed from doorways and across war room tables and through the walls of the great hall. He knew every wolf's name. Every one. 200 people. He knew which young wolf had just passed his first endurance test and what that had cost him. He knew which bonded pair had lost a child to fever in the winter and still carried the weight of it. He knew which elder's joints ached worse in cold weather and made certain she was placed near the hearth at meals without anyone pointing out why. This man. This feared, ruthless, cold alpha. He knew every name. I thought about the rumors. The women he'd bought who were never seen again. I thought about it differently now. Not gone. Protected. Hidden. Sent somewhere Ren and wolves like him couldn't follow. I didn't ask Cadman directly, but I noticed on the third morning a quiet conversation between him and Mira that ended with Mira sending a fast rider south. I thought I understood. Preparations being made. Just in case. On the third afternoon, I was in the inner courtyard when the first symptom appeared. I had taken to spending time there. The open air helped, and I had begun slowly, carefully, attempting to do what Cadman had suggested. Trust what's inside you. I had been sitting with my wolf. Not fighting her. Not suppressing her. Just sitting with the immensity of her and letting it be there without fear. It was uncomfortable. Like trying to hold still inside a very strong wind. But each time I tried, she settled slightly more, as if she was learning that I wasn't going to push her away again. On the third afternoon, while I was sitting with this, something happened. The light changed. Not the actual light. The sun was still the same autumn gold, still the same angle. But my perception of it shifted, like a door opening inside my head, and suddenly I could see more. Finer gradations of shadow and movement, the minute shimmer of heat rising from the stone. The exact instant a bird in the far corner of the courtyard decided to lift off before its wings moved. I blinked. It stayed. And then smell. The world scent opened up like a book. Every individual thread of it, suddenly distinct. The pine resin from the forest beyond the walls. The metal of the armory 2 corridors away. The 12 different wolves who had crossed this courtyard in the last hour. Their individual scents as legible as names. And beneath all of it, Cadman's scent, winding through the stronghold like a river finds the low-ground cedar and iron and wood smoke and something older beneath it. Something that had no name. In any market or pack I'd passed through, the something older was the Vale blood. I know that, my wolf said inside me. Clearly. More clearly than she'd ever spoken. I've always known that. I pressed both palms flat on the courtyard stone. Breathe, I told myself. That's usually good advice. I spun around. Cadman stood in the courtyard entrance, watching me. I hadn't heard him approach, which before 3 days ago wouldn't have been remarkable. He moved quietly for his size. But now I could hear, from 2 corridors away, a wolf walking in soft-soled boots. I hadn't heard him, because my senses had been so overwhelmed by everything else that his actual physical approach had somehow been below the noise, which meant my awakening perceptions were not yet calibrated, which meant there was still a great deal of power coming in that I didn't know how to manage yet. Something's happening, I said. He crossed the courtyard, crouched down beside me. I had ended up sitting on the stone without quite deciding to, and looked at my face carefully. Your eyes, he said. What about them? They've changed color. I went still. What color are they normally? Dark brown, I said. They're silver, he said. Almost completely. I breathed. Is this your wolf waking? He said. Quietly. Certainly. The Vale bloodline asserting itself. He held my gaze. It's been suppressed since before you were born, Senna. Your mother suppressed it. Deliberately. For your protection. And now it's deciding you're safe enough to surface. He paused, which means something shifted. Something told it you were no longer in danger of being used against your will. I looked at him. Something told it, I repeated. His jaw shifted slightly. Yes, he said. Cadman. Yes. Did you do something? Did the partial bond, is it already? No, he said firmly. No bond has begun. Nothing has connected without your full, conscious choice. He was very steady, very certain. What's happening is internal. Your wolf's own assessment of the situation. Her own decision. Her assessment is that I'm safe, I said slowly. Apparently. I looked at my hands. My hands, which were beginning, at the very edges, to glow. Faintly. Like moonlight under skin. I don't know how to control this, I said. No, he agreed. You won't, not immediately. Is it dangerous? To you? No. He paused. To anyone who tries to harm you? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I looked up at him. Ren is going to feel this, I said. When a Vale female wakes, he'll know. He likely already does, Cadman said. Which is why he'll move sooner than the fortnight OSRA estimated. How much sooner? We think tomorrow. The word landed. Tomorrow. Everything Cadman had been building toward, the flanking position, the split force, the strategy we'd mapped out over 3 days in the war room, would be tested tomorrow. Are you ready? I asked. He looked at me steadily. Are you? He said. I thought about that. About a girl who had buried her mother in an unmarked grave and told herself to only survive, who had spent 3 years being invisible, being unremarkable, being the thing no one looked at carefully. I looked down at my hands, at the faint silver light moving in them like moonlight on water. My wolf rose to meet my attention. Patient. Immense. Ancient. Ready. I asked her. She didn't answer with words. She answered with the feeling of standing at the base of a mountain, looking up, and feeling no fear. Only recognition. Yes, I told Cadman. And I meant it. But somewhere across the forest, across the territory border, in the thornwoods dark, Alpha Wren was feeling the waking of a Vale female and making his own preparations. And I had no way of knowing, not yet, what those preparations included. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that Ren had spent 20 years preparing for exactly this moment. And he had one advantage we hadn't accounted for. He wasn't coming with 40 wolves, he came at dawn. Not dusk. Not the dark of midnight, when wolves typically press their advantages. Dawn, which told me immediately that Ren was not a conventional thinker. He knew that dawn attacks disrupted the expected rhythm, that defenders braced for night and relaxed, fractionally, with morning light. I was in the war room when the first signal came. 3 short horn blasts from the northern watch post. Then, after a pause that felt like a held breath, 2 more. Myra's head came up sharply. "That's not 40, she said. Cadman was already moving to the territory map. "How many?" I asked. "The 2-blast addition means the watch estimates over 60. Myra's voice was controlled, but tight at its edges. He brought reinforcements. 60 wolves against 63. No longer a flanking advantage. Now a straight contest of strength and strategy. I watched Cadman's hand move across the map. "Steady. No hesitation. Pull the western force back to the ridge line," he said to Mira. "Don't abandon the position. Just pull back far enough that they have to commit to the northern pass before the flank can engage." "He'll see the reduced northern defense," Mira said. "Yes. He'll think we panicked when we counted his numbers." Cadman looked up from the map. "Let him think it." Mira held his gaze for one moment. That particular look between people who have fought together long enough to trust without requiring explanation. And then she was gone. Cadman turned to me. "You stay here," he said. "Barred doors. OSRA and 2 guards. That's not. Senna. If I'm in the stronghold while you're fighting at the border, every wolf Ren has stationed inside this territory. However many, whatever arrangement he's made with your traitors." "Traitor," he corrected. "Singular. We confirmed OSRA was the only one." "You confirmed she was the only one Ren used willingly," I said. "You didn't confirm she's the only one he found." I held his gaze. "He's had 8 months. He's thorough and he's patient. You said so yourself." His jaw tightened. I watched him work through it. The reality of it. A split force on the outside. An uncertain interior. And the most valuable thing in the territory, sitting in a room with 2 guards and a healer who, however genuinely she'd committed to accountability, had passed information to the enemy for the better part of a year. "Then you come to the border," he said. Finally. The words like a decision he hadn't entirely wanted to make. "Yes. You stay behind the main line." "Agreed. If the line breaks, I run." "I know." He looked at me. That long, level, charged assessment. "No," he said. "If the line breaks, you don't run." Something in his voice. "Cadman. If the line breaks," he said quietly, "your wolf is awake now. What's in you, what's been waking for 3 days, it has never been fully tested." He held my gaze. "I'm not telling you to fight. I'm telling you not to suppress it if something comes. You don't know what will happen if I stop suppressing it." "No," he agreed. "But I know what happens if you don't." The implication sat between us. I thought of my hands, 3 days ago, beginning to glow at the edges. I thought of the size of what lived inside my wolf. The mountain in the dark. "Come on," he said. The black hollow wolves assembled in the outer yard with the particular focused silence of people who have prepared and accepted what's coming. No speeches. No ceremony. Cadman walked through them and they straightened. Not from fear, I noticed, but from something more like gravity. The way objects orient toward mass. He stopped in front of the young wolf from the dinner table. The one with amber eyes who'd said Veilborn and gone pale when Mira silenced him. "North Ridge Secondary," Cadman told him. "Keep the younger wolves back until the first line is committed." "Yes, Alpha." Steady. Determined. He moved on. Pack members. Names. Specific instructions for each. I watched him do it and understood why 200 wolves would die for this man. He knew them. He saw them. That was rarer than any amount of power. He reached Mira last. Something passed between them. A look, a nod, the compressed communication of years. Then he turned, and I fell into step beside him, and we walked out the stronghold gate together into the pale dawn air. Ren's force was visible from the ridge line. 61 wolves by Myra's count. She had an eye for it, had spent years in territorial negotiations. They moved in disciplined formation through the northern pass, following the natural funnel of the valley. directly into the position we'd planned for. Cadman signaled his western flank to hold. The northern line, 30 wolves, met Wren's advance at the pass. The clash was visceral and immediate. Claws and blades, and the particular roar of wolves in combat. I stood at the ridge line with a small guard of 5 and watched, and felt something inside me pull tight. Not fear exactly. Attention. My awakened senses took in everything. The movement of the battle. The gaps forming in Wren's line. The positioning of his strongest wolves. Clustered on the left, deliberately, trying to push Cadman's right flank back toward the valley wall. He was trying to pin them. The left, I said to the wolf beside me, a senior fighter named Davin who'd been assigned to stay with me. Wren's pushing our right flank into the valley wall. If they're pinned there, the western force can't flank effectively, Davin said. Already seeing it. They'd be cutting across the battle rather than around it. Can you signal the western ridge to adjust position? 20 degrees north. Davin looked at me. For exactly 1 second. Then he raised the signal horn and sounded the adjustment pattern. Below, the western flank began shifting. And then I saw him. Wren. He wasn't in the main press of the battle. Of course he wasn't. He was at the edge of it, watching, directing, calm, composed. Dark riding leathers. A long sword at his hip. A face that was, I had to admit, striking. Sharp-boned and cold-eyed and absolutely focused. His gaze moved up the ridge. Found me. He had known exactly where I'd be. And I understood, in that instant, that the battle below was not the real move. Move, I started. But they were already coming. 4 wolves breaking from the trees on the eastern side of the ridge. The side we hadn't covered, the angle we hadn't accounted for, moving fast and silent in a flanking maneuver that had nothing to do with the battle in the pass. It had everything to do with me. Davin engaged the first 2 immediately. I ran, not away from the ridge, along it, because running down into the valley meant running into the battle. Running back toward the stronghold meant leading them there. The ridge was the only option. 2 wolves behind me. Fast. Gaining. I could hear them. I could smell them. The thornwood pack scent. The urgency and focus of wolves executing a task they'd been trained for. My wolf rose. Not slowly, the way she'd been waking over the past 3 days. Suddenly. Completely. Like a fire that's been banked catching a full draft of air. The light came first. I didn't choose it. It simply came, silver white, rising through my skin the way dawn rises, unstoppable and sourceless. The 2 pursuing wolves stopped. I turned to face them. They were in a partial shift, half-wolf, claws extended, battle-ready. And they stared at me with expressions that had shifted from focus to something older. Fear. Pack instinct, deeper than training, deeper than orders. The instinct that knows when it has made an error in judgment about what it's pursuing. I didn't attack them. I simply stood there and let what was inside me be there. Fully. Completely. The silver light expanded. The wolves took 1 step back. Then another. And then one of them turned and ran. The second lasted 3 more seconds before following. I stood on the ridge in the dawn light with moonlight pouring out of my hands and thought, distantly. Oh, this is what I am. Below, in the past, something changed in the battle. I felt it. Felt it the way you feel a shift in weather, before I saw it. The thornwood wolves faltering. The ones closest to the ridge edge, who could see the light. Wolves were not, at heart, primarily rational creatures. At heart, they were ancient things. And ancient things remembered what veiled blood meant. What it had meant before the sundering. Before the hunting. Before the extinction. They remembered what it was to be in the presence of it. And something in that old memory said, stop. The faltering spread. Like a wave running backward through water. And in that moment, in that fractional gap of hesitation, Cadman's western flank came through. The battle was over in 20 minutes after that. Not because of me. Let me be clear about that. Cadman's strategy, his wolves, his positioning. That was the victory. That was built over days and years of preparation and trust. I was the unexpected variable that created a 3-second gap. And 3 seconds in a battle perfectly positioned is everything. Wren retreated. Not fled. Retreated. There was a difference in his kind. He pulled his force back with discipline, leaving no wounded behind, signaling a temporary cessation. Pack Law recognized the signal. Cadman matched it. A space opened in the pass. And then Wren walked through it alone. He was taller than he'd appeared from the ridge. Lean and composed, and walking with the absolute authority of a man who has never lost enough times to expect it. He stopped 10 feet from Cadman. His eyes moved to me, standing slightly behind and to the right. I expected you to hide her, he said. She doesn't hide, Cadman said. Something moved in Ren's expression. Reassessment. Veil blood is active, he said. You can see it from here. He tilted his head. You initiated the bond. No, Cadman said. Then how? She woke herself. His voice was very steady. That's the difference between what you would have done and what I didn't do. He held Ren's gaze. You would have forced it. I waited. And she woke on her own. Ren was quiet for a moment. A willing waking, he said slowly, as if calculating. Yes, which means the power is fully hers. Ren's eyes moved to me again. Not transferable. Not bondable by force. He paused. You knew that would happen. I hoped, Cadman said. I looked at him. He didn't glance at me. He kept his gaze on Ren. But I heard the word. Hoped. Not planned. Not calculated. Hoped. She's useless to you then, Cadman continued. A veiled female who has woken willingly cannot be bonded by force. The power simply won't transfer. It becomes inert. To anyone who takes her against her will. He paused. You've spent 20 years hunting something that requires the one thing you're not capable of giving. And what's that? Ren said quietly. A reason for her to choose you. The silence in the past was absolute. Ren looked at me. Directly. Fully. Without pretense. Is this true? He asked me. Not with aggression. Almost with genuine curiosity. Yes, I said. You woke willingly. Yes. Because of him. Not a question. I met his gaze steadily. Because I was safe enough to, I said carefully. Because for the first time in 3 years, someone gave me enough space to remember what I was. I paused. That's not something you can replicate by force. Ren looked at me for a long moment. And then, and I didn't expect this, something changed in his face. Not defeat. Something older than defeat. Recognition. The veil line, he said quietly. It always required consent. In the old texts. He almost smiled. Bitter and resigned. I thought that was mythology. Most true things get called mythology, I said. He looked at Cadman. OSRA's son, he said. Return him, Cadman said. Now. Today. And withdraw your force from my border permanently. And in exchange, you leave this territory alive, Cadman said. Simply. And I don't pursue what you did to my healer. A pause. Ren tilted his head slightly. That's a generous offer. I'm aware. Most alphas in your position would take the head. Most alphas in my position, Cadman said, haven't just watched 60 wolves hesitate because of a woman standing on a ridge. I don't need your head. He held Ren's gaze. I need you to understand that pursuing this was a mistake, and that it would be a greater mistake to try again. Ren looked at me one more time, and I believe, he finally understood. Not just the tactical reality, the other reality. The one that had nothing to do with power transfer or ancient bloodlines or territorial advantage. What it looked like when something was genuinely chosen. The boy will be at your southern border by nightfall, he said. He turned and walked back through the pass. His force withdrew. The pass was empty. The morning birds began again in the trees. Cadman turned to me. His expression, that always controlled, always calculating expression, had come entirely undone. He looked like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time and had finally stopped. You were supposed to stay behind the line, he said. I know. You almost. I know. Senna. I know, I said, and smiled. I didn't, though. He looked at me for a moment that stretched long and warm and full. And then he laughed. Low and brief and completely genuine. The rarest sound I had heard in the Black Hollow, that we rode back to the stronghold in the thin morning light. The wolves were quiet in the way that comes after a long tension finally breaks. Not silence, but ease. The particular relaxation of bodies that have been prepared for violence and are now standing down. I rode beside Cadman. For a long time we said nothing. The forest moved around us. Ancient, vast, indifferent to battles and bloodlines and the complicated things that happened between two people on a ridge at dawn. You hoped, I said eventually. He looked at me. That I would wake on my own. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, but you knew it wasn't certain. No, it wasn't. He kept his eyes on the path. A veiled female who wakes willingly, who is given sufficient safety and time to come to herself, retains full ownership of her power. It becomes entirely internal. He paused. It also becomes unbondable by force, which removes your value as a weapon. You gambled the entire strategy on that. I gambled, he said, on giving you something real. He glanced at me briefly. Not a tactic, a genuine choice. I absorbed this. And if it hadn't worked, if I hadn't woken, then we would have fought the battle conventionally, he said, and won or lost on our own merits. A pause. Either way, you would have remained unmated, unchosen, free, even if that cost you the territory. Even then, I looked at his profile. This man, who had bought me to protect me, who had kept his distance to protect me, who had built his entire strategy around the possibility of giving me something no one in 3 years had thought to give me. Space, time, a room with no bars. There's something you haven't told me, I said. He didn't tense, but something in his posture shifted fractionally. Cadman. There is, he said, quietly. Tell me. He was quiet for 4 full breaths. The trees moved around us. The horse's hooves found the rhythm of the path. The completion bond, he said finally. I told you it was permanent, that our survival would be linked. He paused. I didn't tell you the full consequence of the permanence. I waited. For you, he said carefully. The bond amplifies everything you already are. Your power becomes complete. Your wolf fully realized. Your bloodline at its full ancient strength. Another pause. Longer. For me, a partial veil descendant bonding with a full veil female, the consequence is different. Different how? The veil blood in my line, he said, has always been dormant, vestigial, an old mark that carried the memory, but not the reality of what it came from. He met my eyes briefly. A completion bond with you would activate it. Fully. I stared at him. You'd become more than I am now. Yes. How much more? I don't know exactly. His voice was very controlled. The old text described the bonded veil male as changed, beyond the normal range of alpha capacity. He paused. Beyond anything in the current territories. The implications settled over me slowly. Like snow, cold and quiet, and covering everything. Which means, I said, that if we bonded, if I chose it, you would become the most powerful alpha in the known world. Yes. And every other alpha would know it. Eventually. And they would come for you. Not to steal me. To destroy you before you became uncontrollable. Probably. I breathed. Cadman. Did you keep this from me because I didn't want it to influence your decision, he said. It came out faster than his usual measured pace. The words of someone who has been holding them for too long. If you knew bonding with me would make me the dominant force in 7 territories, I didn't want you to choose it for that reason. And I didn't want you to refuse it for fear of the consequence. He finally looked at me fully. I wanted you to choose it, or not, for the same reason you'd choose anything. Because it was true. The path turned. The stronghold came into view through the trees. Stone and ivy and towers that refused to fall. You've been managing the implications of this, I said. Alone. For how long? Since I confirmed your bloodline. Since before he even bought me. Weeks. Of carrying the knowledge that bonding with me would change the balance of power in every territory for 1,000 miles. That it would make him extraordinary and therefore a target. That it would reshape everything. And he'd kept it entirely to himself, so I could choose freely. This man. You should have told me, I said. Yes, he said. I would have chosen the same thing. He went very still. How do you know? He said. Because it doesn't change anything that matters. I met his gaze steadily. You're already the most powerful thing I've encountered. Not because of bloodlines. Because you are the first person in 3 years who gave me a choice. I paused. That's not power that comes from a bond. That comes from character. I held his eyes. The rest is just consequence. Consequence I'd rather face with you than avoid by choosing less. The stronghold gate was just ahead. Cadman pulled his horse to a stop. I stopped mine beside him. He looked at me. In the morning light. Clear and open, and without any of the control that usually armored him. Senna, he said. Yes. I need you to be certain. I am. The consequence. I know the consequence. It will change. Cadman. He stopped. I know, I said. Quietly. Absolutely. I know all of it. And I am choosing it. His jaw moved. That small, deep shift that I had come to understand meant he was holding something enormous very carefully. Then come inside, he said finally. And we rode through the gate together. They said the completion bond was silent. No ceremony. No ritual. No requirement for fire or sacred ground or the blessing of the moon. Just two wolves. Two choices. The same word spoken twice. They said you felt it like the first breath after drowning. Like the world clarifying. Every color more itself. Every sound more its own thing. Like a window that has always had a film of gray on it suddenly, simply becoming clean. I know they were right. About all of it. But they left some things out. It was evening. The pack had been fed. The wounded tended. OSRA's son, a slight, dark-eyed young man named Pell who had survived 8 months of Ren's captivity with his spirit somehow intact, had been brought to the southern border at dusk, exactly as promised, and was now in his mother's care. Cadman had stood witness to their reunion. He'd stood at the edge of it, at a respectful distance, and watched a mother hold her son. And I'd stood beside him and watched him watch them. And I'd understood something about why 200 wolves would die for this man. He carried their weight willingly. All of it. And never let them see it was heavy. We were in his quarters. The fire had burned down to a steady amber glow. The maps were pushed aside. The weapons were on the wall. For once, the room felt neither strategic nor defended. It felt like somewhere two people might simply exist. He stood at the window. The moon was just rising. Not full, not new, but that particular phase between them where it holds both energies. Where it is fully itself in the middle of its cycle. I thought that was right somehow. Are you afraid? He asked without turning. A little, I said. You? A pause. Yes, he said. Good. He turned from the window. Good. There was something almost amused in it. It means it matters enough to be afraid of. I held his gaze. Nothing worth choosing is risk-free. He crossed the room. He moved the way he always moved. Economical, unhurried. The particular certainty of a man who doesn't question where he's going. And he stopped in front of me close enough that I felt the warmth of him. His hands came up slowly. Both of them. To my face. Careful. Deliberate. Not taking. Not claiming. Holding. His thumbs against my jaw, his palms against my cheeks, and he looked at me with those storm-gray eyes that were already, at the edges, beginning to silver. Last chance, he said softly. To change my mind? Yes. I lifted my hands and covered his. Ask me again, I said, and I'll start to think you're hoping I'll change it. Something broke open in his expression. Everything he'd been holding for weeks, months, maybe longer, released all at once. Senna. His voice rough and certain and completely his. Do you choose this? Yes, I said. Do you choose me? Yes, I said. He pressed his forehead against mine and said very quietly, Then I am yours. Completely. Whatever consequence follows. The bond didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived the way the best things arrive. Like recognition. Like something you've always known becoming, finally visible. A warmth that started at the point where his skin touched mine and moved outward. Through my chest, down my spine, into my wolf where she received it not as invasion, but as completion. Like two rivers that have been running parallel, finally joining. The silver light came. Both of us this time. His, rising from that dormant veil, blood waking completely for the first time in 6 generations. Mine already awake, meeting it and recognizing it. Two lights, the same color, the same ancient source. Meeting. And something happened that the old texts had described and that I now understood could never be truly described. A completeness. Like a question you've been holding your entire life. One you've stopped expecting an answer to, suddenly, quietly, being answered. He kissed me. It was nothing like the careful, measured, controlled man I had spent 2 weeks understanding. It was everything under that. Everything he kept below the surface. The exhaustion and the longing and the particular ache of a person who leads from the front and trusts from behind and carries what no one else can see. All of it, finally released. I held him. He held me. And the bond settled around us the way the moon settles into the sky. Without effort. Without apology. Simply there. Complete. Outside the stronghold, in the vast and ancient forest, every wolf in the Black Hollow territory stopped what they were doing for exactly 1 moment. Lifted their heads. Felt it. A warmth moving through the pack bond like a tide. Not command. Not demand. Belonging. The young wolf with amber eyes, standing watch on the north ridge, felt it first. His eyes went wide. A slow, enormous smile moved across his face. Mira, in the great hall reviewing the battle's final count, went still. Pressed one hand flat against her sternum. Exhaled slowly. said nothing, but her expression, that efficient, armored, battle-worn expression, became something entirely different for one long, private moment. Something that looked like relief, so profound it had nowhere left to go but into the eyes. OSRA, holding her son in the healing ward, looked up at the ceiling, felt the warmth pass through, and quietly, without explanation, began to weep. When the silver light faded, we were still there. Just two people in a firelit room. But different. The kind of different that doesn't require examination or announcement. The kind you simply live forward into. "How do you feel?" he asked. I considered the question seriously. "Like myself," I said. "More than I have ever been." Something moved in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly it." I looked at his bracers. The mark on them. The veil mate mark, which 6 generations of descendants had carried as memory. Which was now, finally, not memory. "The other alphas will feel it," I said. "Yes. They'll come. Eventually. Are you ready for that?" He looked at me, and I saw what the bond had done to him. What the full waking of 6 generations of dormant veil blood looked like when it settled into a man who was already the most capable wolf in 7 territories. It didn't make him look larger. It made him look settled. The way a fire looks after it has found its right size. Not raging. Not suppressed. Exactly what it needs to be. "With you," he said. "Yes." I pressed my palm flat against his chest. Felt the bond there. Warm and certain and enormous. Felt my own power meeting his, and becoming neither his nor mine but ours. "Then let them come," I said. He covered my hand with his. The fire burned low. The moon rose. And the black hollow slept. For the first time in a very long time, without fear. 6 months later. The winter came hard to the black hollow territory, the way it always did. Without apology, all at once, the ancient forest bowing under snow until the branches touched the ground and the whole world went white and quiet. I had learned to love it. The silence of snow was different from the silence of fear. Different from the silence of a cage or a market or a room where you kept yourself small and unnoticeable. Snow silence was generous. It covered everything equally. It asked nothing of you. It was simply there, and you were simply there, and the world was briefly, mercifully still. I stood in the inner courtyard in the snow. My wolf was fully present. She had been, every day, for 6 months. Not surging or wild or difficult. Just there. Awake. Alive. The way a limb feels after a long numbness finally clears. The ordinary miracle of sensation returned. My eyes were silver now permanently. Mira had found me a piece of polished metal to look at myself in. The first week after the bond. I'd stared at my own reflection for a long time. I looked like myself. Exactly myself. Just visible, finally. The way things look when the light is finally right. Footsteps in the snow behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. His scent arrived before he did. Cedar and iron and that oldest note beneath it. The veil blood fully awake, fully his now. Changed as promised, but not into something unrecognizable. Into something complete. His arms came around me from behind. His chin rested at my temple. We stood in the snow. 3 riders from the Eastern Compact arrived this morning, he said. I know. I heard them. They want a meeting. Formally. To reassess the territorial agreements. Reassess, I said. That's a careful word for what they want. Yes, he agreed. It is. The Eastern Compact. 3 alphas who had spent the past 6 months watching the Black Hollow's new reality from a careful distance. Feeling the shift in the balance of power the way you feel a change in weather. Before you can name it, in your bones. What will you tell them? I asked. That I'll receive them, he said. That the Black Hollow's borders are where they've always been. That its terms are what they've always been. A pause. And that the only change is that I am no longer operating alone. I turned in his arms. Looked up at him. No longer operating alone, I said. No, he agreed. Quietly. Certainly. With the particular warmth of a man who has spent a very long time alone, and is still daily, surprised by the absence of it. Not alone. I pressed my palm against his jaw. The scar, old and silvered, beneath my thumb. He turned his face into my hand briefly. Eyes closing. The smallest gesture of the largest thing. Cadman. Yes. I want to know where she is. He opened his eyes. He knew what I meant. He'd known I would ask eventually. The last Veil female before me. The one who had died 80 years ago in hiding. Unmated. Alone. My predecessor. I know where her records are, he said. In the Thornwood archive. A pause. Wren had them. He used them to track the bloodline. Would he give them to you? He'd give them to you, he said. If you asked. I thought about that. About a woman who had spent her life hiding what she was, as my mother had. As I had. About a bloodline that had survived through concealment and suppression, and the particular courage of mothers who loved their daughters enough to make them invisible. I want to find them, I said. The records. Whatever she left. Then we'll go, he said. When the snow clears. Simple as that. Then we'll go. The ease of it. The astonishing, ordinary ease of having someone who simply said, then we'll go. I pressed my forehead against his chest. He held me in the snow. Around us, the black hollow was alive with its winter routines. The smell of bread from the kitchens. The sound of the young wolves training in the covered yard. Myra's voice, cutting and precise and somehow warm, directing the morning's watch rotation. A stronghold that had survived so much it had stopped trying to look pristine. A pack of 200 wolves who had felt a warmth move through their bond 6 months ago and had woken, one by one, to something they hadn't had in a long time. Not safety exactly. Wolves didn't require safety. Surety, the knowledge that the foundation held. That what they'd built their lives on was real and certain and not about to shift. Pell, OSRA's son, dark-eyed and quieter than before his captivity but unbroken, had joined the pack's messenger corps. He was good at it. Fast and steady, and with the particular navigational instinct of someone who had spent months learning a territory not his own. The young wolf with amber eyes, whose name was Fen, I had learned, and who blushed magnificently every time I spoke directly to him, had passed his full warrior assessment 3 weeks after the battle. Cadman had been there for the final trial, had said nothing during it, had simply been present. That was enough. More than enough. I thought sometimes about the girl in the cage at the Crossroads Market, who had told herself to only survive, not escape, not fight, not hope. I thought about her with tenderness and also with something complicated. Because she was right, that girl. She had assessed her situation accurately. Hope, in a cage, is its own kind of violence. But she'd been wrong about one thing. She'd thought that survival and hope were opposites. She hadn't understood that sometimes in the right hands, the right territory, the right room with no bars. Survival is just the word you use for hope before you're ready to call it that. I was ready now. I pulled back slightly from Cadman's chest and looked up at him. When the snow clears, I said, we go to the Thornwood. We get the records. Yes. And then we find out what happened to the ones before her. The whole line. Yes. Because there might be others. He looked at me. Something careful and attentive in his expression. Others, he said. Veiled descendants. Like me. Still hiding. Still suppressing. Still, I paused. Still being told their wolf is broken. His jaw shifted. The particular movement that meant something had landed precisely. Senna, I know what it is to be invisible, I said. I know what it is to be called fractured and faint and worthless. I held his gaze. I don't want to be the last one who finds out the truth. He was quiet for a moment. Long enough that the snow fell 3 soft, small falls between us. Then we find them, he said. I nodded. He pressed his lips to my temple, held them there, and in the quiet of the winter courtyard, with wood smoke rising from the stronghold chimneys, and the ancient forest holding its white, generous silence all around us. I felt it, the thing I had told myself not to reach for in 3 years of cages and markets and rooms with invisible walls. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just there, warm and certain and unhurried, like a moon rising, like a tide, like a wolf who has finally, after a very long time in the dark, come home. The end.